Hey everybody, this is Nathan from Doctors of Running. Today we're going to be talking about a shoe that has probably made me think more about current trends in the footwear world than any of the other shoes that I've tested this year or maybe even ever, and that's the Hoka Bondi X. This shoe, I want to run through a couple of the specs really quick. You can just see from it the huge amount of stack, even though it's a little bit deceiving because in the back here there are a lot of sidewalls. They're about as long as the first joint of my thumb or just short of that. So they're really, really long. But the stack for this is 33 millimeters in the heel and 28 millimeters in the forefoot for a men's. And then for women's, it's actually a little bit lower, 31 in the heel, 26 in the forefoot. It's coming in at 10.6 ounces for a men's size 9, that's 300 grams, and 9.1 ounces or 257 grams for a women's size 8. And so this is definitely a bigger shoe. Obviously it's in the Bondi realm, but it's a whole new take on the Bondi, and their slogan for this is everyone can level up. And that's one of the things that actually made me think a lot about how footwear design is changing, what people are trying to do with different components of shoes to make them more efficient for runners, and what kind of effects might those have on our body. But before we get into all that stuff, I just want to talk about kind of my experience in the shoe, kind of where it fits in the Hoka line, what it's feeling like. So when it comes to fit, this and the Mach 4 were two shoes that really bucked the trend for fit for me when it comes to Hoka. With a lot of Hoka shoes, I had a lot of problems that I know a lot of people did, other people do as well, with the sidewalls that come up, generating some blisters near the big toe joint there, sometimes even in the heel. And they always fit a little bit more narrow. I would say that this one has way more room in the forefoot. I say way more. Do I mean way more? More. There's more. This is not a wide toe box, but it does have more room than the typical Hoka is going to have, and that made it a lot more comfortable, and I didn't have any blistering problems. So that was a big plus. And this kind of this engineered upper was stretchy as well, which provided a good amount of space for all of my toes. The biggest issue that I had was with the tongue. It's thin, which I like, really thin, but it's super short. So I had a really hard time even using the extra eyelets because it would come up above the top of the tongue, which has kind of that cut design that's supposed to go around one of the tendons in the front of the foot. So that's one thing that I think they could just really easily fix. Make the tongue a little bit longer so that you don't have any problems with the top laces going over the top of the foot. But I didn't have any problems with lockdown in the midfoot or in the heel. So fit was, I think, a step forward for Hoka, getting away from some of the things that cause a lot of those blistering issues for people. And it was really, really comfortable on top of the foot. Then you come down and you have a whole new construct for Hoka. This is a new foam compound. It's actually the softest one. I talk about it being the softest one of any of the shoes that they've put out. That was definitely true when I stepped into the shoe. Really, really marshmallow soft. Except that changed really, really quickly. Even 10 to 15 miles in, the foam settled quite a bit and it was still soft, but it wasn't as marshmallowy for the foot. And I'm a person who typically prefers something a little bit on the firmer end, but because it settled down a little bit after those first 10 to 15 miles, I actually did really well and enjoyed kind of the feel of that foam. Another part of the midsole that obviously cannot go without mentioning is that this does have a carbon plate running through the entire midsole. You can see the line where it starts up closer to the heel and then it dives down further away from the forefoot. And so as the foam settled, I could start to feel the presence of the plate in the heel, that it was kind of more of a rigid surface and a stable surface to land on there. And then it stayed very mushy and soft in the forefoot as I was toeing off. It is relatively rigid, but I would say more flexible than in the Rocket X, maybe more similar to the Carbon X2, which has a little bit of flex to it. And when I started doing daily miles, I think the combination of the compression of the foam here, as well as the little bit more flexibility in the plate, made this run a lot more naturally than I expected. When I grabbed the shoe, I was kind of like, oof, I have no idea what's gonna happen. But The extended heel here, which I'll talk about later, but it stays out of the way. It's just beveled a lot, and you can even see, if I can show you all, none of my wear goes past the heel. So none of this is ever touching the ground. None of this extension is ever going to hit the ground. And I'm a pretty profound heel striker without overstriding, but all of the wear is happening under the heel and forward thanks to the bevel that allows it to be present here in the heel but not get in the way. I didn't have any issues with irritation on the front of the shin or anything like that. So the ride of this was, again, it ended up working really well for me at daily paces. Recovery miles felt really good. I did some strides in it and a little bit of tempo work, but I really didn't prefer it for that. The biggest issue, this foam is really, really soft. And we have what's called the Green Circle Trail around Stevens Point. It's a gravel trail, and it's made of crushed gravel and granite. And so the little X pattern on the bottom of the shoe within 1/10 to 2/10 of a mile would be completely full of rocks. So I stopped taking it out there. I did want to go back out to get some rocks in there to show you guys what I'm talking about, but I am using this shoe only for the roads at this point because of that. Gets pretty loud and annoying on the road quickly once you get off the gravel. Looking at fit, again, I think a really good improvement from a toe box perspective. The ride changed a lot over those first 10 miles. It's still very, very soft, but it did settle down, and the plate being closer to the heel made it do okay. When it comes to stability, the plate was, I think, paramount for this shoe even being functional. It allowed some rigidity, both forward and backward, and medial to laterally, allowing it to stabilize that really soft foam. The other things that they do here to create some stability is when you look at the shoe from behind, you can see how far out on the medial and lateral sides the midsole is expanding. And so it's giving you, just like Hoka typically does, it's giving you that really wide platform to operate off of, and you're not walking on a tightrope. You have a large, wide base to operate. So there's a decent amount of stability that's built into this, but definitely with the softer foam, it's a truly neutral shoe. And people who have issues, especially in the mid to forefoot, because of how far the plate is away, you're gonna need to have stable mechanics and not have any stability requirements up front to do well with this shoe. That's kind of my experience in the shoe, but a couple of topics that I think we want to talk about. The first is the extended heel. Hoka has been doing this with a number of shoes. This one is different than, say, the likes of the Clifton Edge or the 10.9, which is the craziest one we've seen. Those have an extended heel without it being beveled up, whereas this one is beveled all the way so that, like I said, the contact point when you hit the ground is underneath your heel and not behind it. And that's a big deal from a loading perspective. We've talked about it on our website a number of times, but when you hit the heel here, and if this was not beveled and brought up, that creates a bigger lever arm around your ankle, which basically means that the front of your shin, if you're a heel striker, is going to have to do a lot more work, which could potentially cause problems like certain types of shin splints or exertional compartment syndrome, a number of things like that. So definitely something to consider, but for shoes like the Clifton Edge and the 10.9, but in this case, it's beveled so much that this is, in my opinion, this is more of a branding for Hoka than it is something that's going to make an effect on the shoe. I don't think that this extended heel really does anything to make the ride or the landing more smooth, because this foam is never going to be interacting with the ground. But I really think that this and the swallowtail design that's so shallow is really just a branding method for Hoka, which is fine. It's their look, and I think it can be kind of cool. I get comments about it, but I don't think it really enhances or changes the ride of the shoe. We've talked a lot about plates. You've heard Matt go down his thing on plates. They put a plate in this shoe and it's a little bit more flexible. They talk about every runner can level up. I think that we've tried to express enough that the current literature that exists that works to decipher how much is each component of a shoe contributing to improvements in efficiency, I think that those have all been consistent so far to show that a plate is a small piece of the puzzle, where in the 4% study, you know, and then looking at a couple of other studies that have tried to piece it out, they found that maybe 1% of the 4% is contributing from the plate. So the plate is only giving a little piece of improvement. The other study that was done that we've talked about before, but there was a group of researchers, including the guy, Hoka, who did the original 4% study. They cut the plate. So they removed that stiffness from the back to the front by cutting the plate, and it didn't have an effect on the efficiency of the shoe. And so it brought into question again, how important really is the plate? But in this shoe, what I think the plate does is it makes it runnable. I think that if the plate didn't exist, the stability would be wicked. You would have nothing to stabilize your foot on the platform because of how soft and marshmallowy it is. The plate gives some both stiffness and rigidity longitudinally and medially and laterally from side to side, and I think that makes this shoe runnable and usable for daily miles. But that is the final question that I want to kind of talk about is, what about training in these carbon plated shoes? And honestly, if we're talking about from a research perspective, it's a question we don't have an answer to as to whether it's good for us, bad for us, indifferent. We don't actually know, but here are some considerations. And you'll hear different people have different opinions on this, but I know that for me and the guys on the team, we all think that using carbon plated shoes should be, right now with what we know about them, used sparingly and with a purpose. And the reason for that is we don't know exactly how the loads are being shifted due to stiffening the midsole and stiffening it from back to front. And so we err on the side of caution for something that might not be giving you that much benefit to begin with. So that's kind of one thing that we consider. At the same time, one of the other things that people have talked about is, oh, using a carbon plated shoe is going to weaken your foot because it's doing the work that your foot should have to do, but you're having a carbon plate do it, so it's going to get weaker. There's some evidence in totally other parts of the body that aren't applicable directly here that could call that logic into question, because that hasn't been proven either. And so one thing that they found with low back pain is that it's been thought for a long time that if you put on a big brace for your back, that wearing a soft brace like an aspirin brace or something is going to decrease the muscle activity in your core, and it's going to weaken your abdominals, and therefore it's going to worsen your back pain over time and make you weaker. They've done a number of studies to look at that, and they did find that it didn't actually change the amount of activation of those abdominal muscles. And so people are able to use soft lumbar braces to help with their back pain temporarily without the risk of having detrimental effects to their abdominal strength. We can't necessarily say that that's going to be the same thing that's true for the carbon plate, but we can't also say that we know that because you're having a carbon plate that it's going to make your foot weaker. And so that's just another one of those things that's up in the air as a big question mark, and we don't really know what direction it's going to go. But that's a lot of thoughts here on the Bondi X. You can read our full review. It is on our website at doctorsofrunning.com. I go into detail about some of the studies that I referenced when talking about plates. And then I also go into the maximalist movement in that article as well. And so, but it is a very comfortable and was an enjoyable trainer for me. But I think the nature of having a plate in there calls into question if it's something that I would recommend to people coming through my clinic unless it was for a specific purpose. So if any of you guys end up getting your hands on a pair of these, let us know what you guys think. Hope you guys have a great night. Talk to you later.